Hi, this is Christy Wellborn, and you're listening to Estes Park Radio.com. I'd like to welcome John Meisner with the Estes Park Archives, part 2 of the Lewiston fire. And boy, can you just give us a little briefing to catch us up and
Sure.
then continue? This is an interesting story.
If you go over to Tregent Park, there is a plaque, and it shows what the Lewiston looked like up on top of that hill, which is on Bighorn Drive, and we were talking about how the Lewiston condominiums right now are on that property. We're sitting right now in a location where the Birch Ruins are right to the north of us. And it's very similar down there. Until about 15 years ago, you could go and climb around on the Lewiston ruins because of that fire that happened in 1941, and because the foundation was stone. It was the only thing remaining after the fire, and Estes Park never went up there and took it down because it was so isolated. So it was a place you could, you weren't supposed to, it was trespassing, but you could go around and explore. And there were some people that went up in the 1980s, and Will Sitta in particular took some great pictures of the foundation. But we were talking about
How he got all his money.
yeah, how he got all of his money. How a
'Cause he had
man who
moved-
starts out as a butter maker in Nebraska, near Lincoln, Nebraska, comes to this part of the country, northern Colorado, works in a bank for a few years in Loveland, and somehow acquires all these funds to come and build not only the Lewiston, which was a very fancy hotel, but then start to acquire more and more hotel properties, and form this thing called the Rocky Mountain Lodges.
Now, did he actually build the Grand Lake Lodge?
Yes, I mean,
Wow.
he didn't. He provided the money to
Right,
build
exactly.
it. He had
It was his
contractors
wow.
and people over there building, but he built it. And then the thing we didn't talk about last time too, he was also involved with another gentleman named Byerly, with the Bear Lake Lodge and Fern Lake Lodge.
Wow.
So he had almost 10 hotel properties scattered around Rocky Mountain National Park and Estes Park when his empire was its largest. And we were talking about last time in 1929. That was the one year that he's clearly in charge with Roe Emery of the Stanley Hotel property. So I don't know, again, if had he spread himself too thin. This was a boom time for Estes Park. This was again, this is prior to the stock market crash and entering the Great Depression. Every year Estes Park was gaining more and more tourists, and so that's the reason he was doing so well. But something happened in 1929. And so, as I say, our papers are showing public notices where the Stanley Hotel, he's in trouble there. His own Lewiston property is coming up for auction because he hasn't paid Roe Emery on a loan. So that was his own property was auctioned off in 1929. There's no question. And Roe Emery stepped in and bought it. So we have this growth period, this period for A.D. Lewis and his Lewiston Hotel empire. And then we have kind of the downfall, which is right after that. Now, he does stay around for another year and manage his own Lewiston, but everything else is turned over to either his half-brother, who's, again, reporting to Roe Emery, or just taken over by other private entities. So Roe Emery then emerges from all of this with all of these properties, and A.D. Lewis has nothing. And so by 1930, he's moved to Los Angeles, he and his wife. And you don't hear much about them anymore. He doesn't come back to Estes Park to visit that often, so you can't find out much about him. A.D. Lewis died in 1957, and his wife died sometime before then. But we're very interested because he had both sons and daughters in finding out what exactly happened in 1929 and 1930 that caused, and for example, the Lewiston was sold at auction for $24,000, which at that time, it wasn't that much. It was a lot, but it wasn't something that A.D. Lewis wouldn't have been able to get his hands on, I don't think, or have friends loan him. So I don't know if he was just ready to leave or what the story was. But so from the 30s then on, from 1930 until it burned in 1941, there were a period of time when it wasn't open at all. The Lewiston just sat up there, this huge, monolithic, gigantic structure sitting up on the hill, and it just perched up on top of this hill. And so in any panoramas you see of Estes from that time, you're always seeing this wonderful structure that's the Lewiston on the hill.
Now, where
Sat
did A.D.
empty.
Lewis go after 1920?
He went to Los Angeles.
He went to Los Angeles. Okay.
He moved to Los Angeles, and again, he had another hotel even during this big boom time. In the winter time, he was out in Palm Springs, so he may have gone out there and continued to run that hotel. I just don't know because he's not coming back, and his children aren't reporting on his whereabouts or what he's doing. But he clearly had more of his life that would be interesting to find out in California. So we were talking about the hotel during the 30s. It wasn't open, and then about 1934 it reopened. And that was a gentleman who owned, at that time, the out in Horseshoe Park, what am I trying to say? Fall River Lodge. And so that was a gentleman named McKelvey. Russ McKelvey, who was successful in running that out at Fall River, and so came in and was managing the hotel up at the Lewiston, still being owned by Roe Emery, and so he's either leasing it or just managing it. But not to the extent advertising-wise, or it sounds as fancy as it used to be when A.D. Lewis was there. So by 1941, kind of gotten over the Depression, we're about ready to enter the war. Estes Park has had a very good year again as far as tourism. So 1941 was a successful year for them. So that's where you question whether, well, was it burned down because it's starting to get towards the end of its life and this is a reason to claim insurance or something like that? Because in September, one of the articles, and not the Estes Park paper, but it was covered out in Los Angeles, for example, and it was a big fire, so it was covered in another number of newspapers, said that out at the power plant, someone had taken a copper wire and somehow grounded the electricity so that there was no electricity in Estes Park. And it didn't seem like it was accidental. It seemed like that was on purpose. Well, the result of that was, besides the fact that power was off in downtown Estes Park, was that the fire siren wasn't working. And so there was no way to alert the fire department in Estes Park that there's this fire going on at the Lewiston. So it took, again, it was a big fire and it probably wouldn't have mattered anyway. But Estes Park got about a 1 hour delay before everybody got over there and got the trucks and got up there to start fighting it. And so each fireman had to be contacted individually. So by the time they got there, it was a done deal. It was clearly going to be totaled. And it certainly was. And again, we have great photographs because people, just like for the Park Theater, when the mall was on fire, people were positioned all around taking pictures. We have wonderful photographs. I mean, it's a terrible thing,
sure,
but we can certainly document it. And again, no one was injured because the hotel was closed for the season. And that was another reason why it was kind of late in getting it reported. Here's this issue raised, this speculation. Was this intentionally set, or did someone go and intentionally kind of subvert our ability to fight this fire by grounding and shutting off the power into town, or was it accidental? In Estes Park, we definitely have two different stories that get passed around. One of them is kind of humorous and completely untrue, although parts of it may be true. People speculate that the Lewiston was being used as a brothel at that time, and that's true. Every hotel in Estes Park always gets accused of that, of having mafia connections, of having, illicit things going on, and it may have, again, I don't know how you control that from happening. But the story that gets told along with that is that the churchwomen had finally had enough, and so they marched out of church and they soaked rags in kerosene and they wrapped them around the banisters and they set the Lewiston on fire. I don't think that happened, because that story says that would have happened right after they got out of church. They were just so mad and they came over to Lewiston. The problem was this fire took place on a Thursday, not on a Sunday, so the churchwomen weren't probably around to be planning this event. The other thing is, Roe Emery wouldn't have allowed for that. I mean, I just don't think he would have said, okay, that's fine, the church has decided to burn it down. And there's no indication that he ever, pursued any criminal charges against
that.
him.
Sounds like a tall tale.
It sounds like a little strange. The other possibility is, and this is from Castles of Wood, and again, it's there's no way to prove or disprove this story. It's just from people passing on oral history, that they'd gotten a big load of coal in. They always shipped coal in. That's how you heated your places in the winter. And that they were burning things. One of the staff members was burning a bunch of newspapers or cardboard in their big fireplace, and it overloaded the flue, which is the way to exhaust all this heat and smoke. And so the flue caught on fire up on the top floor, and that's what started the fire, and that would have been an accidental reason. And then this speculation about the copper wire and shorting is just an accidental thing, and this was just all a big accident. Again, it's one of those fires, and any fire in Estes Park, starting from the Stanley Hotel, was clearly accidental. But there was a hotel that burned that same year, 1911, when we were talking about the Stanley Hotel. That's the Estes Park Hotel out on Fish Creek Road. That was very much intentional. No question that was intentional.
Oh, is that right?
Because they fired some of the staff members earlier that same morning. And so there's great speculation that the people who were fired just came back and got mad and set the hotel on fire. Again, we can talk about these and not really get concerned because no one is ever killed in these fires. So again, lots of loss of personal property, and it's a tragedy to have these gorgeous structures burned down. But then we can start speculating, what's the reason for this, and why do these always happen during the off season, when no one is around, when no one's in there, when the hotel is clearly on the downward trend of what it used to be something spectacular and fantastic, and now it's run into some problems. Are these intentionally set? So that's one of the things that we always have to question with big Estes Park fires, as far as hotels and big structures, was it an accident, which most of them are, or was there some other motivation to set this fire? So Los Angeles Times, for example, has a wonderful photo. Again, it's a terrible photograph, but it shows the structure on fire and the hoses that they're trying. They're just snaking these hoses from anywhere they can hook into water, and it's just a lost cause. There's just no way they're going to be able to bring this thing under control. Loveland paper talks about how when Loveland got up here, it was already a lost cause. So they went over to the Stanley about 11 o'clock that night after, again, hosing down all the surrounding structures, and had dinner at the Stanley. So the Stanley provided them with a meal. Fort Collins, again, all of these newspapers cover this. This is a very well-documented fire and a well-documented period of Estes Park's history. And a tragedy. And like I say, never reopened. Roe Emery, right after that, within a couple months, sold that property to his wife and his son, and then it just got kind of turned over again and again. Nothing done to it. Off limits, don't trespass up here, until the condominiums came along. And then there's two other developers that came in. And one of the developers saw this as an opportunity, and so the foundation was still there, and built his property, his building, his condominiums, right on top of that foundation. So there's still some of the Lewiston that remains. So if you go over there today and drive up Bighorn and turn off that Lewiston condominiums interest, and again get permission from the property owners, you can walk around and see the stonework, the stone stairways, some remnants of these pillars from this fantastic hotel, one of Estes Park's most famous hotels from the 1920s.
And we'll never know exactly what happened.
Yeah, it's funny because you'd think if some of these things turned into court cases, or if there was some police investigation. Now, obviously, they don't have the ways to investigate that they do now, but that there'd be some record left of somebody coming up. And especially the 1911, the Estes Park Hotel fire, where it's clearly, and the papers are clearly saying this was intentionally set, this was arson. I think they'd want to recover some funds or put some people in jail that, had done that. And yet you never see the follow-up. You definitely won't see it in the Estes Park papers. But we've, been out and looked at the other surrounding papers. The one things that we don't, have access to because you're charged by the hour and it's very expensive is any court cases that may have resulted.
I see.
Either, indictments or acquittals or anything. Or anything as far as suing someone. Mm-hmm. And so those may exist in Larimer County. All of Larimer County's records are down in Denver. So it should be done. It's just we're waiting for things to get a little easier to search, like they are for so many other things like family trees and census records and all of that. Maybe in 10 or 15 years, court records will be so much easier to search that we'll just wait until that to see if there is any backstory to what the Lewiston, how it finally ended up.
Well, another interesting part of Estes Park history. Thank you so much.
Yep.
And we look forward to talking with you soon. John Meisner, Estes Park Archives. You are listening to EstesParkRadio.com. I'm Christy Wellborn.